Welcome to the Family Pictures Podcast. I'm Michael Branson Smith, and this is Jim Groom.
Hello.
Oh, thank you, Jim. This week we are doing the Italian classic. After a French classic, we are doing Amarcord, the Federico Fellini film, my first Fellini film. Yes, I am a neophyte of all things Italian.
I can't believe it.
Italian
OMG.
cinema. But whereas Jim Groom, our resident of Italy, a husband of an Italian woman, she pushed this on. No, she encouraged this film. And I actually think it's a really wonderful follow-up to 400 Blows. We have, I think you well described in our notes, where Truffaut was this like sharp reality of a boy's life in Paris, and this is Fellini's recollection of his childhood, as seen through a friend of his, Tita, who's the principal character, but not really, right? Because it's a story of the family, an Italian town, and the Piazza is the center of this family town, and Tita's family is another center point that we get to discuss quite a bit in detail. But this is, since you're a man of the Italian frame, why don't you kick this thing off for our Jim?
Yeah. So my Italian's terrible. I can't even pronounce the title right. Amarcord, I don't even know. But I will say in the dialect of Rimini, where this film is supposed to take place, roughly, and it's kind of a neighborhood of Rimini where he grew up, Fellini. It's basically I remember, or a certain sense of, based on the dialect, the love of remembering. And I think I was watching a great documentary about Fellini because I love Fellini. I'm fascinated by his direction and also by his very, not only dramatic, but his camera's always moving. He's, brilliant on so many fronts. But I also love just how bodily he is, and he brings out certain parts of my own
parts?
being. Yeah, that I don't want to maybe talk about too much. But I think he talks about this film as he created a boyhood in this, and his other one, which takes place in Rimini, called Il Vitellone, where it's not so much Rimini as it is or as it was, but it's Rimini as he imagines it should be. And that's, for him, very much this idea of this dreamlike space that he takes out of his, memory. And where you feel with Truffaut and 400 Blows, like there's this stark realism to this kid and these realities. And those realities are paralleled in, as we'll talk about in Amarcord, but they're very much fanciful and fantastic, and they seem very whimsical at times until actually you start to come up against, the hard realities of fascism. And so the film is taken place in 1937. 1937 is a significant year in Italy because this is a moment where Italian fascism is transforming to align more directly with German fascism. And this is also the year, actually 1938, so the year that's in discussion, where they're going to start passing the racial laws, which will actually, single out Jewish people and start actually, ultimately, over the coming years, send them up to concentration camps. So there's a really, the fanciful kind of whimsical nature of this film is also, for me, part of the critique of Italian culture. And I don't mean this as a unique critique on Italians, but I mean this as a unique critique on any culture that doesn't really want to come to terms with its fascism, whether it's in fascism or whether it's reflecting back on its fascism. So there's a joke that we say here in Italy, and we is me to my family, is like, how can everyone during fascism in Italy have been a partisan? Like, everyone was like, yes, I was a partisan. I was like, if everyone in Italy was a partisan, then there would be no fascism. And I think there's a certain amount of erasure of this part of history. And that's a really interesting question, especially given that in 2022, you have the rise of the Fratelli the Italia, which is essentially Mussolini's party that has come back into power here in Italy. So much so that Giorgia Meloni, who's the prime minister and who was elected to that, who's part of that party, who's also the first woman prime minister, but also a expression of the fascist party, she would go on in a 2022 interview to talk about Dio, Patria, Familia, which is a Latin for basically God, homeland, and family, which was a fascist kind of like call out. Like it was basically, and you see them in the banners on the piazza during the fascist parade.
And it's funny, that's literally what the priest at the end of the film calls out to the new married couple. Basically, you have a duty to family, church, and country.
And so, and I think it's interesting because Fellini doesn't dig in on the Jewish question, at least in this film. And this was Ferrara and other parts of this region of Emilia-Romagna of Italy has a huge Jewish population. So there is a huge Jewish population in this parts of Italy, and he doesn't go there. But it is a film not only of dreams and fanciful nature, but also a deep critique on the folks of this town and of Rimini, who in some ways kind of, were more concerned with like the childish natures of sex and of bodily pleasures and of all
Let's
these
ignore
other
the
things.
politic now and just, take care of ourselves and pleasure ourselves. Is that what you're saying? That's what we should be doing?
Exactly. And also, maybe fantastical anecdotal stories about, polishing off 28 concubines. Like there is all sorts of craziness in this film, and I love it for that. But I think also underneath all the joy and underneath all this nostalgia is a razor-sharp critique of Italy in 1937 and of the place he did. And I really like it for that because I think in America in 2025, looking across the ocean, but also in Italy in 2025, the re-emergence of fascism raises some real questions for us. So I thought this was also a timely film, not only because it's so different from 400 Blows, but also because it opens up the question of how does an artist like Fellini deal with the past of Italy and fascism.
I mean, I think so. I mean, I'm going to need to lean on you in this critique because this was unlike 400 Blows, where there's like a clear plot line. We're kind of like watching, Antoine, Daniel, like move through space, and we're really latched on him throughout the entire film. And it's like, what's going to happen to Antoine? What's going to happen to Antoine? And, there's relationships with his family and with his schoolmates, and then eventually with the system. In this film, like, sure, Tita is this kind of, analog that we could compare, but it's not like Tita's the center of the story by any stretch of the imagination. He's just one character of many. And as part of that, I mean, I was spending so much time just working through this film and just trying to track what was going on and who is who. And it was really an interesting way to work through a film. And I thought we'd go through a lot of that because you're right. Like, ultimately, this family picture is about a town as a family. And it starts with the end of winter, and we see the floating poplar seeds, but it starts with the burning of the winter witch. It's the old lady that they make this massive bonfire in the piazza. And we see, like, we're introduced to characters right away. There's this older daughter and her father headed there, and she's like, you got to get home early. The doctor says you need your sleep. And he's like, the doctor's an asshole. I'll go to bed when I want. We're like, this is the character of the film right off the bat, right? And you don't know it's Aurelio, the father of Tita, and Miranda, his wife, in the beginning, because it's just, there is no exposition in this movie whatsoever.
No, you're thrown into this world, and the world is, like you said, you have Bishin talking about the poplars, and then you also have this kind of historian that is a strange figure throughout.
He's a lawyer.
Yeah, he's a lawyer, but he's kind of like the town historian, quote
right,
unquote.
right.
Like,
and everybody constantly just harangues his efforts to be proper, right? Like, we're not that serious. Don't stop giving context. Come on, Go have sex or something else, you know?
Exactly. And it's interesting because to your point, like there's no exposition. You're thrown into the piazza, but you're also given that where you are located is seasonally, right?
Right.
Very clear that you're going from spring, passing from winter to spring.
Right.
And you can say it like, I think Gradiska, who's another figure who comes out when they're in the barber and she's shaking her ass. And, she's this very voluptuous woman who's a huge part of the film, actually, and a huge part of the fantasies of various people in the town of this film. And I think that, for me, is you're kind of pulled into the town, and the camera makes you almost part of the town and part of the townspeople that's walking around seeing the comings and goings on of this space.
Yeah. And Gradiska, I love when we were introduced to Gradiska because she was flanked by two women who were like, she was clearly the top dog. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is like the Plastics in Mean Girls, right? Like where you have the queen bee or in Heathers as well, right? You have the queen bee and you have the mean girl crowd, right? That tells everybody what to do and how to behave. And if you want to have sex with me, you have to be, up to my par, but you're never up to my par. And I was like, wow, that two films that I love that are hearkening all the way back to Fellini and a random woman.
Yeah. And it's interesting too, because as you said earlier, like always, the characters are like, screw my doctor, or you have Bishane up top of the kind of pile of people are throwing out their chairs. They're throwing out all of these stuff from their house as they get ready for spring. And they're going to set this on fire as a huge bonfire in the middle of the piazza. And someone's up top adjusting the witch on the top pile, and they set it on fire and they remove the ladder. So this person is like trapped on a fire top. And that's kind of like immediately the tenor of the film. It's this playful, yet there's a little bit of an edge to it. And you just get this sense of like, you don't know who to identify with. It's as if you're watching it as a child, all of this stuff unplaying. And it's interesting how the camera, and I love the way Fellini's camera moves, kind of puts you in the space of actually being a person on the ground making sense of this world.
Right. And very, very slowly, which similarly happens like the next day at school, right? Where we see the entire class gather for the annual photo. And it's just, everybody looks like they're 30, number one. Like nobody looks like they're in grade school or high school or whatever it's supposed to be. But mind you not, we still don't know who Tita is. I mean, at the bonfire, back at the bonfire, we are technically introduced to Aurelio and his wife, and Miranda has like pride of place in a chair that they've brought back from the house so that she can sit in it. And they're soon yelling at their kids, like Olivia has lost his heel and Tita's like jumping through the bonfire. And my favorite is like Aurelio is calling his brother-in-law an asshole, like Lalo.
From the beginning. It's
from the beginning. But we still literally don't know who's who because they're just two people introduced amongst a dozen or so, right?
Yeah.
And even at the school, there's no less than 9 teachers, right, that were cycled through, right? There's a teacher with a ridiculously long cigarette butt. It's like an inch long, and he's like trying to hold it up in the air so it doesn't lose it while he's trying to teach.
Well, he's actually, what is happening there is he's doing a verifica for Tita, and so Tita's there, and he's asking Tita, what year did X amount of had? And 19 or whatever, 69. And the teacher's like, damn it, it's 59. And then the ash breaks.
Yeah.
But those are actually, this, liceo in this town is still how kids learn in Italy today. Like my kids always have these oral examinations, very little writing, where the teacher will basically call out a kid and say, tell me this, this, and this, and this. And then, they're not exactly like, touchy-feely in the same way that my kids imagine American school is. My kids always imagine, like, if I was in American school, I would get all A's. That's easy. Italian school's hard, right? Like, they're all about that. But I love it because that captures a little bit of that verifica mentality of these oral examinations.
Oh, you're right.
What they call interrogations, in fact.
Interrogations. Well, there's also just so many others. Like, there's one nutty professor who's regaling about something, and he walks into a closet, and the kids just love him. There's
The
another
philosophy
teacher.
professor. Yeah.
There's another teacher who's like sneaking alcohol into her flask from a flask into her coffee. There's the really, really beautiful algebra teacher that's working with the student at the board, where the other boys proceed to create this like, Tinker Toy type contraption of a long tube so another student can pee from 4 yards away and make it look like the kid that's next to the algebra teacher is peed right in front of him. And then the Greek lessons. You should do that one because that one's one of the inspirations.
Yeah, it's actually, so it's funny because these scenes of the Liceo, these scenes of the institution of school, is very similar to what we got when we opened up 400 Blows, right? It immediately started with an institution, and Fellini's take is very kind of like playful, right?
Yeah.
The teachers are caricatures, but yet you also have this kid peeing through a thing, and so like the teacher sees it. But then you have the teacher, this Greek, so they're doing ancient Greek, so it's probably a Liceo Classico, and so basically he's trying to teach them Greek and to pronounce the Greek, and the kid is like there, and he's like, no, like, use the and so the kid's trying to say is like la la la, and so he's doing that raspberry that I talked about in the 400 Blows, and it's just the teacher finally loses his nerve, but like there's this sense in Fellini that there's this kind of struggle, right? And there's this dynamic, and the kids take on all this. So after you're taken through these 7 or 8 classes, the final scene of them in the school is downstairs somewhere in some bathroom smoking cigarettes and looking out towards the sea. Where they hear someone yelling, and who's that someone? It's Volpina, who's such a weird figure. She's like this almost like mad, rabid, like sex figure, but she almost doesn't seem like healthy or like, I don't know what it is, but she just really goes around and says, I'm Volpina, and the people are like always bothering her. But there's never a scene where you would think in any other film she would be raped or there would be some horrible thing. It's like, no, she's just a part of the fabric of this town.
Mm-hmm. So we are then introduced that night to Tita's family. And we finally kind of get a sense of, it's a familial context. This is why we're doing this podcast. We should talk about this podcast.
What is it you said to me? So we had to push this off a little bit because you had some other obligations with your family. Yeah. And so you were like, I started watching like Amarcord and I really like it, but I have no idea how it's a family film because I guess
good homework, truly, but it took me, the way I have to decipher things is I'm literally like typing out this happened and this happened and this happened, and I'm like looking at the Wikipedia and figuring out who's who later on, actually. And so then reviewing other things like the bonfire scene. But anyway, we're in Tita's, and you don't sense this immediate. Like, so we're at this table, and there's this huge stove behind Lalo and Miranda. So Lalo is Miranda's brother, so Uncle Lalo is there. And opposite them are Olivia, the younger brother, and Tita. And at the head of the table are the grandfather and Aurelio.
Yep.
All right. And the stove is literally cooking soup and cooking this massive pot of laundry. So we know where the laundry came from Johnny Dangerously, right?
Exactly. There you go. Nice connection.
And so, but Aurelio, I love it. He's just like eyeing Lalo for Lalo doing Lalo things. The entire time, Lalo could just not be perturbed. He's being mothered by Miranda, which totally annoys Aurelio, the way that Miranda loves her brother. And he's taking too much soup, right? And he just can't stand him. Meanwhile, grandfather is a total perv.
Oh, right. Grandfather's like, when I was young, I would get all the girls, boom, boom, boom. And
no, it's the whistling. I wish I could. Yeah, there you go. It's like fist pumping, and it's his son has to be like, Dad, finally.
Yeah, the grandpa.
We're at the table. And he's grabbing. There's also Gina, who seems to be a house helper, and he's like grabbing at Gina's butt, and she's just like, please.
Yeah, it's wonderful. And then so Aurelio there's a knock on the door. He gets up, he goes to the door. And then he comes back and he sits down and he seems very like placid, and he's like, "So Tita, what did you do yesterday or whatever?" And he's like, "Oh, I went to the movies." Blah, blah, blah. He's like, "You went to the movies," and then you start seeing him boiling and then he starts yelling and screaming about Tita having pissed over the balcony on this guy's hat. So he had to buy the hat. He had to pay for the hat because Tita was, basically doing what kids do and pissing over a balcony. There's a lot of pissing. There's a lot of like bodily stuff. There's a lot of shitting in this podcast. Like there's all these, and I love that about Fellini. It's so bodily and visceral.
Right. And it's loud and yelling, and like prior to him going off on Tita, basically Miranda and Aurelia are in a fight about nothing. Like there's no context. It's like she's not eating. He's like pestering her. She's like, leave me alone. It's nothing. And so she literally gets up and turns her chair and doesn't face the table, stops facing the table. And but then after Tita, like, after Aurelio finally confronts Tita about the peeing on the man's hat, he like chases him out of the house, and then Tita's like running around the back of the house, and then you finally realize like, whoa, this is a big house, right? This is with a huge courtyard, and that's when I first saw. I was like, wait, this is a family of wealth in a weird way, right?
But
and
yet working class in that he built his own empire, I guess, in terms of construction.
Yeah, he was a bricklayer, right?
Yeah. And the other piece too is so he runs around. And he comes back in screaming and yelling, and she's like, what? He still needs she's going to bring his meal back out to him, to Tita. He's like, you're going to give him his meal after what he did? He starts screaming. And then the grandfather leaves, and we'll get back to him. But Oriolana goes like this, and he's going to I'm going to kill myself. And he goes like this. This is how he's going to kill himself.
Yeah.
He's going to what? Like rip his jaws open?
Jim has put, if audio only people, Jim has proceeded to put his left hand in under his upper teeth and his right hand on top of his lower teeth, and he's trying to spread his mouth open. And there's this thing. Miranda's like, I'm going to kill everybody in this family. Then she's like, no, I'm going to kill myself. And then he's like, I'm going to kill myself.
And then she goes into the bathroom. He just tries to, like you said, rip his jaws open. And then the grandfather goes into what seems like the formal dining room and puts his arm between two chairs, and he goes, 1, 2, 3, fart. 1, 2, 3, fart. And that's just like, I can't help like this.
My God,
insanity of Fellini's just, and all like, I think, Ebert said, Fellini makes it all look so easy. And I think that's what I really love about him. It just seems so seamless and so easy. But one of the documentaries, and I'll probably talk about it a few times, is Fellini, A Born Liar. There's a documentary that I highly recommend anyone out there. It came in like 2000, 2001. It's amazing. But one of the things that you realize when he's doing scenes from this film is Fellini sitting there coaching the actors, and he knows every line. And he's speaking to them. And in fact, those characters are often speaking directly to Fellini.
Oh,
and
really?
He's like part of it. And he has everything memorized. And he's like so impeccable to the last detail about where they look, how they look, what they say, how they say it. It is absolutely amazing to watch him direct, and you can get a sense of that in that film. But anyway, you just get a sense. It all looks so seamless, like it's just happening, but he is making it all happen so meticulously, and that's the kind of weird, Ebert says he makes it seem so natural, but when you see the actual process, it's absolutely him every step of the way making this happen.
Yeah, and it's very different from Hollywood cinema. Well, making it happen in Hollywood is like massive productions from the perspective of like grandness, right? And this is more like, this space is interesting. I'm going to find this way to present this space in this elegant way, and it is in this dreamy like way. And then there's these like additional flares that come, and there's a good example of that later on when the fascists showed up, which is pretty soon. But before we get to the fascists showing up, we take a little brief sojourn into the church, another point of pleasure in the town of Rimini, where Miranda has said, Tita, you need to do your confession. It's been forever. And so Tita's like, fine, I'll do it. And so, of course, the priest that the perv he is obsessed. Tita, you touch yourself? Tita, did you touch yourself? When you saw, did you think of the woman in the tobacco shop? Did you touch yourself?
Exactly.
Did you imagine her breast the way I...
And he said, don't lie to me, because I know if you touch yourself, because this statue right here is going to start crying, which I love. Like this whole, but also it's interesting because between asking, Tita these questions, the priest is like arranging flowers and like,
right.
You
He's
idiot.
totally distracted. Yeah. He's barely paying attention. And when he is paying attention, he's totally off in his own fantasy of all the townswomen. Right.
Yeah.
And then
masturbation.
Right. And then in the meantime, Tita's like having his own fantasy about Gradiska and saying, I'm not telling him about this fantasy I'm having. I'm not telling him about this fantasy. And it's like there's two people who are like both fantasizing simultaneously and neither of them are talking to one another about it.
Oh, and those are the scenes like, another just amazing montage of carnal lust from a, 14, 15-year-old kid of, the women who are, going to the market and they're in their black and they get on their bicycle seats.
Oh my God. Yeah. That's so funny.
It's very like, I don't know, visual in its kind of, eroticization of this. It's a very powerful scene. And then you come away from that with him really not telling them to 4 kids in a car, all masturbating together, and they're talking about who they're masturbating to, and then one of them, Chichone, which means like, fatty or chubby, is like, someone says Aldina, who's a girl he's kind of in love with, and he gets all mad. He's like, you
not
can't
Aldina! Don't defile my love.
Exactly. It's just, it's outlandish. I mean,
it's totally outrageous. Yeah.
It's wonderful. I love it. Anyway.
But the fascists arrive, and they literally arrive in a parade of black smoke and dust, right? Like the town is lined up appropriately around the piazza, at their arrival, and it's like they're like a piece of fantasy, right? Where when doom arrives, it arrives embroiled in death. And that death is portrayed through this black smoke because it's not just dusty. It's not just dust. It's literally like a black cloud.
Yeah, and it's interesting because as they march through that black cloud, you start to see who's part of that parade. And part of the parade are all the teachers. So all the teachers are actually part of this fascist parade. But then the fascists are coming and, they're talking about these youth leagues, right? The women and the boys and then the young toddlers. And like basically this fascism as, in some ways akin to like, this is the new reality. And the townspeople, Gradiska included, but everyone included, even Tita and his friends are all part of this kind of fascist youth league. Everybody's part of it. Like, it's not like they're sitting on the outside saying, who are these fascists that have invaded our town? Like, the town is fascist.
Well, with the exception of Aurelio, because he wants to go to the parade, but Miranda has locked him in the courtyard to keep him away from the ceremonies, which is pretty great. And it turns out to be something that he gets in trouble for ultimately, right? He gets brought into the fascists. I think whether they're inhabiting the church or something, I'm not quite clear. And they literally start torturing him by making him drink castor oil. That's right. And meanwhile, Lalo is in his uniform playing pool with the fascists, right? And so we have fucking Lalo again, right?
Lalo.
He's the rat. Yeah, he's the rat. We've discovered that Lalo's the rat. And meanwhile, so this is one of the more simple, Miranda is waiting outside the courtyard for Aurelio to return because she knows something's happened, something's going to awry. And this is one of the few moments where it's slightly different. It's definitely seems pretty real. He's really beat down, and she makes this giant bathtub for him and is caring for him, and he's literally naked, so he's very vulnerable. But the whole thing is this lasts for only a hot minute because fucking Tita shows up and starts making fun of him and his body, like being naked with his towel. And Aurelio is all animated all over again. And he's just like, he's all rejuvenated and he's yelling about it. And he starts accusing Lalo of ratting him out. It's like, this family.
I know if I think who I know ratted me out. But then it's interesting, too, because the castor oil makes you soil yourself. So he's basically walking down the street because he's, basically gone to the bathroom in his pants. And his son's like, ooh, puzza, who basically shit himself. And so the father gets pissed. So it's like immediately goes from this really serious, violent moment when he's facing up with the fascist. The idea being is he's the one who put the gramophone in the Duomo, which is playing the Internationale, the Communist Internationale. So there's this idea of fascists are there to kill the communists, right? And it's real because, outside of Russia or what was the USSR, Italy had the biggest, I think it was Russia, Cuba, and Italy had the biggest communist parties. So communism in Italy was a real thing. And it had real kind of teeth, and even more so after World War II. And so, the idea that the fascists and the communists, there would be a real serious tension is definitely kind of there. But the other piece that's interesting is the point when he's getting interrogated, and there's the commandante who's interrogating him. If you see this documentary, Fellini, A Born Liar, basically this is a scene where Fellini's sitting there, and the interrogator's talking not to Aurelio, but to Fellini. Fellini knows every single line that Aurelio's going to speak by heart and does it exactly like Aurelio does it. And it's really wicked to see Fellini embody basically every character of the film. It's something else because this film is actually highlighted in that documentary quite a bit. And it just goes to show you just how much all of these characters in some ways are coming from his imagination.
And so, I mean, it's a really, it's this funky, contrast, right, of this serious moment to this, his being rejuvenated instantly, and taking on his family as the bane of his existence once again. But then we go into this really weird sojourn into the Grand Hotel, which is kind of this stately manor where the people of wealth must have inhabited, or where people of wealth would come and visit nearby at the hotel. And it's because the town is by the sea, so it must have had some historical tourism attraction. And
actually,
you got to give me try to make sense of this for me.
No, quick point on that. There's that whole thing in the fascist parade where you have the Mussolini. Basically, one of the best moments in the film.
Oh yeah,
the Mussolini paper mache face.
Yeah, with the flowers, right? It's like out of the Rose Bowl parade, right?
Oh,
awesome. it's like a sculpture where the colored flowers create the image of the character, right?
Mussolini. It's
and of Mussolini. And then there's this thing where Chicha is fantasizing that Mussolini as the animatronic flower head is telling him he's going to get married to Aldina, and they have this, suddenly they're having a wedding in front of animatronic flowered Mussolini, El Duce.
It's just insane. And so actually El Duce was from this region.
Okay.
He was born not too far away from where Fellini was born. And so and that's very important in Italy, regions, right? Regions are identities. Regions are languages. You're from Italy to everybody else, but when you're in Italy, you're from a region. You're from Emilia-Romagna, and then more than that, you're from Rimini. And so the fact that Il Duce is from this region is important. And I think that really weighs on this idea of Il Duce's face and everybody in that town being very fascist, right? And being a part of that. And I started reading a book, and I'd read one before. It's called The Golden, I don't know the English translation exactly. It's basically like The Gold Spectacles.
Oh, come on. Give it to us in Italian then.
Oh, no. The Golden Rim Spectacles. Gold Rim Spectacles. And so basically it's written by Giorgio Bassani, and he's a guy from Ferrara who's Jewish, and he writes about his experience being in this region during the 30s. And it's interesting, too, because it takes a very different point of view in some ways than Fellini, in that as a Jewish outsider, he was always well aware of what these racial laws meant and how this kind of fascist change was affecting, and it's interesting because you see a community, a culture, a country that wasn't necessarily fascist all take on. Even the Jewish folks took on the identity of fascism until the racial laws passed. And then there was really like, oh, wait, what are we doing? And so I think that's, for me, another piece that I think Bassani, if you're looking to get into Italian fascism and think about that and read about
I'm
that.
looking to get into Italian fascism. How do I sign
read about
up?
it. I am interested in it historically, given our moment now. And so I'm not necessarily joining any parties. Let me be clear.
Okay.
But I see what you said. I did misspeak there. But I thought that was, Giorgio Bassani is a beautiful writer. His book, The Golden Spectacles, reminds me a lot of The Great Gatsby, oddly. But it's just a gorgeous kind of reflection by this Jewish kid about how Italy is changing and what that means. Like, so to the Grand Hotel. Every town in Italy has a Grand Hotel, right?
Oh, okay.
There's always one. And they're kind of like, I like a Duomo, like a church in the middle of a piazza, there's always a Grand Hotel. And this Grand Hotel, interestingly, as we see at certain points, is basically boarded up, right? It's kind of like its heyday
Well, it's
is
shut
gone.
down for the, or is it shut down for the season? I couldn't quite tell.
Could be. That's a good point. It might be.
Yeah. So, but there's these like 3 stories of the hotel, and they're all just kind of weird and silly, right? The first 2 are kind of silly. Like we learn how Gradiska got her name, right?
I love it. Yes.
And she's basically being pimped out to this prince who's in town, and she does this like weird, sexy dance, which he ignores a whole bunch, and he finally comes to her in bed when he's finally ready. So that's odd. But then we get Bicien again, who was the man who was at the top of the bonfire, we haven't described. He's basically this goofy, red-nosed, like, salesperson or delivery guy. You can't tell what he is, but he's just like
vagabond almost.
He's just a town. He's a town character basically, and he somehow gets caught up when there's an emir visiting with 40 women of his concubine, and they all wanted it. Each and every one of them from different balconies throw down their tied blankets, say, "Come on, Emir, come
and they
up,
can't
Bicien."
talk. So what do? They're like, and I'm moving my head for those of you who are just listening. They're like,
oh yeah, like they're gesturing. Come on, look over here. Hey, you guys, or
Exactly.
hey,
So
Bicien,
good.
come on up here. And he's and it's like this weird snake charmer scene with like 50
he pulls
women.
out his little piper, like he's got this little pipe, and he starts playing it. And then it's just like a Busby Berkeley scene. Like these kids, these women come out of the pool, and all of them start arousing out of bed, and it's just like, what?
Yeah. And then and we get one more where there's the boys. This one seems to be present day, and the boys are like spying on Lalo and all these other men about town that are like kind of the fascist men, and they're like hanging out with German women. And the boys are like, ooh, of course, right?
That's right. The one I do love, so as they're getting ready to pimp out Gradiska to this whatever.
Prince.
Royalty prince, right?
Yeah,
and
we don't know.
He's very emo.
There's no context.
No, he's emo. He's just like, I don't care. And he puts on his thing, and he's just drinking, and he's very sad. But the guy says to her, speak proper Italian, which means don't speak in dialect. Speak in normal Italian, like, the official Italian. And so when she goes and takes off she's in bed and she kind of pushes her head out and she says, Gradiska, which it basically means whatever you desire. It just sounds like really odd Italian. So it's a joke too, almost upon her social class and her. Yeah. So there's that whole piece, and Antonella, who luckily I have her to do that kind of bridging, is like, it just sounds so funny. And so that nickname takes on a whole world of its own about like whatever you desire. So anyway, I didn't do a very good job. Antonella would have done it better, but Gradiska's nickname and how it came to be and these stories that make up this town, I think is crucial to, in fact, the world that, and it's truly a world that Fellini is creating here.
Right. Yeah. I mean, that harkens back to this idea of like, I mean, A Christmas Story and storytelling being the thing that holds together a family's history, right? And so it's these stories, and I don't even know who's telling the stories. I can't remember. Is it the lawyer slash like historian?
It's the lawyer slash historian.
Yeah, right. Who seems to be someone who's allowed in the Grand Hotel, right? We kind of learn that as well.
And he's watching. It's funny. There's a scene where obviously the Emir comes in, and the Emir is a very small man and
so
very
tiny.
strange looking, almost looks like
Really
a Jawa.
odd.
And he goes in and he kisses and grabs all the women, right? And
The attendants, yeah.
Yeah. And in fact, the lawyer slash historian is sitting there, and you don't get the sense, you don't know if was he actually there or was it him in his imagination and telling of what it was. And I really like that. And Antonella, who I watched the film with, was like, what do you make of the historian slash storyteller? And I'm like, well, I think exactly that. Like, he's the one who's giving this whole town and this whole universe that Fellini's creating a sense of depth, right? And a sense of, like, it's been going on, and there's more than just, these pastiches. There's actually a whole history that's tying it together, and I like that, and I think that's true, but she's still not convinced.
I mean, every time he tries to give history and context, someone like slaps him or pelts him with a snowball or gives him a raspberry. So Fellini does not respect this character at the same time in his role. Right.
But Fellini's also irreverent about any sense of institutional authority or someone who claims to have authority. So there's also that, but that character, in some ways, the historian's likable.
Right. So this is probably, I mean, there's a moment, we're coming to kind of my favorite scenes of this film, like where the whole family does a trip to visit Uncle Teo, who's sadly, mentally disabled, compromised, right? So he's in like the funny farm. He's in a house, but he's allowed on a day trip with his family.
I like that you spent so much time trying to say mentally compromised and then went funny for him.
Yeah, I was like, I fucked that up, right? Oh well. So
you tried though. That's all that matters.
It's the effort. We're halfway there, right? And so they're all like in cages, whatnot. Not really. It's not as bad as like Antoine Danielle in the police house, but it's like they're constrained, the attendants, the residents of the funny farm / mental institution, and
there you go.
and you get a sense that, but Grandpa and Tita are really excited to see Teo, because Teo seems to be a favorite, like, because Aurelio is such a sourpuss ultimately, right? As a male figure in the family, right? Lalo is just like checked out. He's like, I'm my own dude,
He doesn't care.
He doesn't care at all.
And
so where Teo, you get a sense like he's interacted in his past with the kids and been fun, and you get a sense, and like obviously he's the son of the grandfather, and his grandfather later brags about, he was so smart when they're on the carriage ride to the farm. So now we're going off to a family farm.
Unlike Aurelio, who's just sitting there taking it.
Yeah, he is. He's totally taken. And then we're introduced to Chekhov's rocks in Teo's pockets, where it's like they're like wondering, what do you have these rocks in your pockets for? And we'll find out. And so we're, again, just taken through this space, and there's no context really given. And it's like, who's this really tall man who pees his pants by the side of the road? And they skip right through the meal once they get the farm. There's no establishing of like, we arrive at the farm. There's none of those traditional conventions of introducing spaces, like wide shots that present like, here's the family farm, here's the carriage arriving. We finally get to the farm. Dinner is over, right? They've already had their picnic, and everybody's off doing their own thing, right? Miranda and Aurelio go for a walk. Grandpa gets drunk with the farmhand. Tita hypnotizes a turkey. Olivia stares down a mule. And Teo, left alone, climbs up a tree.
And like any good, I guess bird, calls for a mate, right? Voya la donna! Voya la donna! which
I want a woman.
I want a woman. And
I want a woman. And that's all he says.
Yeah, and the family is sitting there both kind of laughing, but also like, oh, Tio's not any better than he was. Like, oh, Tio, right? Like, they were hoping, like, the hope is everyone's like, Tio's getting better. He looks good. The grandfather's all excited. And, for a second, you think Teo's kind of normal.
Yeah.
But then once he climbs a tree and to the top of this big tree and starts
really
yelling at
big
the top
tree
of his lungs, I want a woman at all costs. The grandfather both, sympathizes with him, but at the same time is like, and the son is like, Aurelio's like, what have you been doing, Dad? Like, he's up in a tree. I thought you were watching him. And the dad's drunk. And so it's just, it's
grandfather's like immediately like impressed with his prowess to get up this tree. And then he instantly goes back to whistling and fist pumping and and gesturing. But they all try to get him down, and now the rocks. He's pelting everybody with rocks, with bullseye, and he's getting everybody. And Aurelio's like freaking out, and he's biting his hat by the side of the. And he's insulting himself, and he's like, "We're all heading home. Let's get out of here. Teo's ruined it. We have to leave." Meanwhile, Miranda, I was like, love this. Miranda's literally trying to escape her family. She's like, "I'm out of here," and she gets busted and gets dragged back into the car, and they all feign leaving. Right, so they get in the car, and it's like a Looney Tunes scene, right? Like where the car, like they're like, come on, come in, everybody, and it's like they jump in, and then they speed off around to the side of the barn, and they stop, and then it's like classic, like you would think like Yosemite Sam thinking he's pulled a fast one on Bugs Bunny, right? And Yosemite Sam sneaks up to the side of the house, and he peers around the corner, and whammo, Bugs Bunny would get him, right? And that's basically what happens, right? Because you have Aurelio trying to check on to see if Teo's fallen for the trick and come down from the tree. But as soon as he peeks his head out, he cracks a rock almost right at his head. It hits the house instead.
That's wonderful. And so ultimately they got to go back to the funny farm and get someone to help. So they come. And the greatest piece is, the family's watching, and there's these two basically orderlies and this very small nun. It's very idea like this, like kind of like the Emir, like tiny. And you're like, what the hell is this, nun going to do? The nun goes up, yells at him, "You come down right now." Immediately Teo comes down. Yeah.
And Teo is like kind of basically doesn't say goodbye. He's like very happy they're there, and he like he's like chit-chatting with the hospital attendants. And so Teo needs that safety of that space, obviously, but he's ignoring his family. And it's really odd, too, because it's some of the most beautiful cinematography at the same time, because we're in this very romantic Italian pastoral landscape. It's sunset with this massive tree that's framing this space, and it's kind of wild. But yeah.
It's the most memorable scene for me of the film.
Sure.
Like when I think of Amarcord, I think of this film.
Right,
I mean, this scene.
That one, and it's coming to it because it's right that now we hit the next season. We've actually we didn't say it, but we had the Teo scene is summer. Right? Yeah, that was summer. The summer is occupied by the entire trip to hang with Teo, and but fall arrives, and it's the arrival of the SS Rex, right? The Rex, which that one I did look up, which was the kind of award-winning fastest transatlantic ocean liner, which was the pride of Italy's technological achievement at the time. And it had held records for some time of being the fastest at going to New York. And so we learned from the townspeople that the Rex is going to be coming by them over the sea. And so everybody's excited, and the family is just like, it's like they all head to the beach and the docks, and then a massive flotilla of the entire town heads out to sea. And you're like, yeah, it's kind of incredible. And you expect like the Rex is going to just show up. But no, the Rex, we learn in a few moments, it's not going to be there until 12 in the morning. So there's plenty of time for people to just get bored and not know what to do, including Lalo, who swam to the boat, so Lalo's got some athleticism too, because what else is he doing but working out and hitting on German women while he's doing his fascist best with his slicked blonde hair, right?
He's a ne'er-do-well, that one.
Yeah, and then BCN pumps in there with a nice little story about a dolphin talking to him, and Aurelio starts to marvel about the stars, and Miranda's falling asleep, and it's all very romantic. And the Rex shows up, and it's actually kind of stunning because you did appropriately note this is a soundstage. It's not. I mean, all the other footage is them in actual boats, but when it's nighttime, there's all of these like rolling shots. It's like the camera's constantly rolling back and forth, imitating the movement of the sea. And there's this giant kind of model or model, post. I don't know what it is of the ship, but it's made to seem massive, and it's incredibly beautiful actually. And it's, I mean, as a that along with the sunset in the scene of Teo is one of my favorites.
I agree. In fact, I mean, a little bit of a point on there because you're right. The Rex, actually, Gradiska, the actress who plays Gradiska, does a great interview if you can find it, where she talks. She's a French actress, and she talks about this scene. And she has a piece in this scene where she's basically bemoaning that she'll never find love. And she said how
she'll never have a family either.
Never have a family, right? And she said how fun this scene was to film because they're rocking in a boat, but this boat is on a soundstage, and all the water around them is plastic. And the plastic is being kind of undulating by this whole very sophisticated craze. So the plastic is creating this idea of the sea.
Yeah, that's some 30s filmmaking,
scenes.
Right? Like,
and then, it's amazing. And then she talks about the big SS Rex coming, which is a model. And they had to drag it along a track as it came to them with all the lights. And they would talk about, like, getting the shots. But there was issues, and I don't remember exactly, technically, where the smoke from the stacks was going the wrong direction. So they had to redo it. But, like, I was like, oh, my God. I had no idea this was all done on the soundstage. And I guess stage 5 at Cinecittà was Fellini's stage. And it was where him and his crew, which he called the family, worked. And they show this in the documentary I was talking about earlier. They show how he built out or how they built out some of these amazing sets. And Michael, they are absolutely like stunning. Like they have entire like sets that are, I don't know, 50 by 100 that are being like, I don't know what exactly they're using to control it.
It's all mechanical.
Like sophisticated.
No,
exactly.
But it's like the Wizard of the Oz, like tornado scene kind of stuff. Like it's this, like they're creating this, and that's what I love. That's classic, super dreamlike stuff, right? Yes. And this is, whereas the Wizard of Oz is doing this out of necessity in 1939. This is 1973 filmmaking, yet Fellini's, in a sense, making this homage to this technique of let's use all this practical, big, large-scale physical magic, right, to create this sense of this perfection of the ship. And it's like the tornado. Like, think about the tornado from The Wizard of Oz. That's just a concoction of some sort of fabric that has something moving inside of it that's at a distance, and there's all this perspective that they're playing with. And I could tell it was in a studio when I watched it, but it made, now that we're discussing it so much, it really makes me think of The Wizard of Oz and all the stuff that was done back then in that way.
And he says interesting because a lot of his films, like there's a lot put on this idea of the acting troupe. And it's very dramatic, right? And people are overacting almost, and they seem to that. But he talked about his filmmaking as not only dreamlike, but as painting first. This idea of him being a very visual artist, and that his sets particularly were about painting. And in particular, he said, I don't want the sea as it looks at Rimini. I want the sea as I see it in my head. And there's only one way to do that, is to create it on a soundstage. So he talks very specifically about, him being, obviously a visual artist because he's a filmmaker, but associating more with a painter than, say, a dramatist or, a writer, etc. So it's interesting, that piece.
Yeah. I definitely don't associate him with a writerly fashion, that's for sure. Maybe poetry, but yes, I mean, not a piece of long form fiction.
Well, maybe Ulysses by Joyce.
Okay, that's true. So this is all part of the beginning of the fall scene. There's this moment we're stuck in a fog that comes, and the grandfather is kind of suddenly lost just outside the courtyard, and he's imagining out loud what his death will be like, but then he's like, up yours to death, right? And he almost gets run over by a cyclist. And then Olivia heads off to school in the fog, and he runs into an ox, and he sneaks by and disappears in the fog. And then, of course, the weirdest part is the end is like all the posse of Tita's friends, they're together, and they're at the Grand Hotel, which it could be shut down or it's closed for the season. It's hard to tell.
Which probably makes more sense because it is open at some other season.
Yeah.
So you're probably right.
And so, but then they're just kind of imagining like, ooh, wouldn't it be so lovely to be attendees? And they're imagining this jazz band. And then they all start to like play instruments or dance to themselves in their own little fantasies. And it's this weird dance of the dead in the fog because each individual is alone, ignoring the other ones. And they're just kind of bopping around on this, patio in the closed down, foggy Grand Hotel. It's so odd.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, it's one of those impressionistic moments that, in a whole scene that takes over, and then you're like, okay, next, there's a car race.
yeah, I know. And I think, honestly, we should skip the car race because this podcast is thorough, but we're going along. So we jump into winter, and Tita is sick. And this is yet another family moment where Miranda's taking care of Tita. And it's really interesting because Tita suddenly just gets he's in his like haze, start asking his mother. It's like, how did you meet Dad? What did he say? How did you fall in love with him? Why did you get married? And Miranda is like, that's too inappropriate a question, and keeps brushing him off. And but Tita at the same time is like, but what about me? Like, it's like a kid like thinking they're gonna die, right? Like they're so sick they're gonna die, and he's like, but I'm supposed to be someone who falls in love. But then he instantly is like, but this person who I love doesn't love me back, and so I'm gonna write these letters that tell her off about how I became a doctor and moved to Africa.
But it's interesting there too because the mother Miranda basically is suggesting like, she came from wealth, and her parents didn't want her to marry Aurelio, and that they kind of eloped. And there wasn't any grand courtship, right?
No.
It was kind of a more practical, but also a different relationship in that regard. And she tries to communicate that because he's like, what was the first date like? What was the first kiss like? And she's like, well, it didn't really work like that.
No, he just tipped his hat, and that was that.
Yeah, so it was interesting, like, that whole idea of this grand story wasn't. And I wonder what that means for the kid. But also it was kind of, but we're jumping a scene, and I wonder why.
You want the racetrack?
No, the tobacconist.
Oh, yeah. Well, you're the one you kept it out. You are the one who can't handle some dirty.
No, I did not. That's wrong. You're wrong. Okay. You're wrong. But anyway, I'm kidding. But I just want to say quickly, he gets sick. But the scene before then is one of the most famous scenes of the film, is when Tita goes in, because he's obviously a sex-driven teenager, and he goes in to the tobacconist, who's this very buxom woman, who's closed up, and he gets her on his back, and he's like, I can carry you, see? And I guess she gets aroused, and then they have this kind of moment, and then he's not doing it for her, so she just basically gets dressed and says, go away. It's such a strange
here's a cigarette
moment. Yeah, here's a cigarette. Go away. And it's just like, again,
so
it's
much
not what
madness
you
in this
expect,
movie.
right? Like you expect him to take it
not
one
at all.
way, and he takes it absolutely the other. But in that way, it seems almost realer as a result. And
no,
as much as it's dreamlike, it seems very real. Like, it wouldn't go like you would think.
No, and to be a quick failure at your first like sexual encounter of sorts, right? And not realizing it at all until you were told you're not doing it right.
Exactly. So that was one. But so Miranda gets sick. I mean, Tita gets sick, but very soon after, Miranda gets sick.
Right.
And Miranda dies.
Well, and in preceding that, there's this whole like, Tita Tita is like chasing Grandiska because there's this massive blizzard, right?
Yeah,
and
that's right.
they create like a the Shining type snow maze, right? That Tita is chasing Gradiska through until he just runs into the hospital, and we get to see, we realize like Aurelia and Tita are visiting Miranda in the hospital, and they have flowers, and and she's noticing her wedding ring is loose. She's probably losing a lot of weight because she's so sick, and Aurelio just basically avoids talking to her, and she's talking to Tita about like, you have to be a better son now. And so she knows she's dying, right?
Yeah. And that's a really touching scene because Aurelio, you're so used to them while they're fighting, they're really tight, and you get a sense of this relationship. And, I think he's looking out the other side. And so she does die. And one of the scenes that follows is her funeral.
Right.
And what's interesting about the funeral is Aurelio is really strong, and he doesn't like, he kind of like is there with his kids and is strong. And her brother, Lalo, is a mess, and he's crying hysterically. Right. And the father says to the son, the son's like, I hope Uncle Lalo's all right. He's like, yeah, he should go to one of his whores.
Right.
That's awesome. It's real.
And it's so sad. Like, Aurelio is so overcome, and during the funeral service, he forgets to cross himself, and and as they head out, there's a death march through the piazza, and the whole town is out to pay their respects, and they march along, and after the funeral, the boys are now alone with their father in the big house, and there's nothing you can do. Like, we all just sit with that for a moment. It's all the cheer of the wild and raucous kitchen is now empty, and people are just holding poses. There's no conversation. There's no fighting. There's no flirting. There's no, because grandfather's gone now too at this point. We were told he's going to America, but we have no idea that when Miranda dies, and so it starts anew, and we're finally back to spring. Like the poppies, winter has ended. Yeah. The poppies are back, and to kind of bring us back around to the front of the story, we end with Gradiska's wedding, in the town coming to Gradiska's wedding, and as she marries a fascist officer or a policeman, we don't know exactly.
Carbonetti, who's basically a fascist.
Okay.
And the great piece about that, and you talk about this too in the notes. It's like, everybody's at the wedding, kind of.
Yeah.
Like, the tobacconist is there, right? Yeah. The kids are there making fun of her.
Right,
like, right. The kid with the big nose, who's super weird looking, Naso. Yeah. And he's actually a famous comic actor in Italy. He's there pretending to be Gradiska. He's got
he's in drag.
And he's dancing with the other kid, and they're like, oh, my breasts are full of milk. Oh, I gotta get married. Like, they have no idea how it all works, but they're just saying it. And then the Gradiska's there, just like, obviously excited but sad, because there's a sense that she's leaving the town.
Right.
And you also get a sense that Tita is leaving and won't be coming back. He kind of disappears, and it's a bittersweet ending. You obviously have the death of the mom, but then you have Gradiska, who's, part of this community, moving along. And one of the things that's, I kind of probably focus on too much, because I'm kind of struggling with this idea of, the everydayness of fascism in this town. And then the idea that it just kind of emerges, but yet they're also very human. And this is a human struggle, and he goes through the whole cycle. And that's only one part of the story. But I also really, I don't know how to say it, but like, I really love the people in this town. And it's people in the town that become the family. And we've talked about this in The Outsiders, like, the family is what you make. And in this story, as it's told, the family is the community for warts and all of its problems, all of its imperfections, all of its political insanity. This is the family in which, Fellini grew up in, and Fellini was made from. And Fellini, whether it's real or part of his imagination, Fellini has kind of conjured up for us. Yeah. And I think at the end, it's the sense of, community as family. And there's an Italian sense to that in the way in which these towns are created and the way in which these people interact. But also there's a broader idea where family becomes more than just that unit, right? And I think there's some salvation in that for me.
Yeah. And I think like, and it's also in a weird way private too, because at the very end, BCN walks up to the camera and he says, "Get out of here. This is too intimate. You shouldn't be here anymore. Like this is our thing." And, and the accordion player who I forgot to mention this too it's like back with the Rex passing by, he's begging someone to describe it to him, right? Yeah, the blind accordion player. And so Grodziska leaves, and the lawyer tells us, how will she live so far from home? Because home, as you've said so much, is the whole town, right? Yeah. And so she's as much a family member to Aurelio and Miranda as Tita is, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and it's also like, it brings up all sorts of interesting questions with being in love with one another and like that whole sense. But yeah, I mean, that was my take on Amarcord, like very different than this complete isolation kind of that we got with 400 Blows. Here you have, this raucous kind of troupe-like world and universe and ultimately that becomes the kind of, imperfect vision of a family, as I think also looking at that documentary and hearing about how Fellini worked and how Fellini kind of imagined himself. I mean, Fellini would bring in vagabonds from the street and he'd be like, "I like the way you look, come in." And then the vagabonds would be part of his thing. And people would ask people like, "How did you like this shot?" And this is Grodziska's interview does this. "How did you like this shot?" And like, no, he was the king and he was Fellini, and there would be one person who said, "I hated it." And Fellini would be like angry and look around, and it was this drunken vagabond who I feel no idea, but it was just telling him, and then he would see him and he'd be like, "Capitano, really? Are you talking again?" But like this idea of this kind of, this raucous family that he had created both as part of his art, but also as part of his imagination. And, I think that, it's one of the many reasons why I love this film.
Well, I think I would never have gotten through this without, a man of Italy that you are through your family. And so thank you, everybody. We were a little late this week, and I hope you stayed with us. This was a long one. There was a lot to talk about. So more soon, and we'll see you next time on the Family Pictures Podcast. Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.